Hey everyone, Sky here to discuss Underworld, Blood Wars, starring Kate Beckinsale and Theo James and directed by Anna Forster. After I saw this in theaters, I didn't think too much about it, honestly. But is it good? That's what my question is. Is it as fine or adequate or average as the last one I gave a 5? So let's get into this and see if it's better. Celine, returned by Kate Beckinsale once again, recaps the audience with the backstory of the first four movies, and Celine loses her daughter as she's hunted by vampires and lycans as she gets captured by vampires and kicks the living shit out of them, as well as lycans. And David, returned by Theo James, wants to know where Eve is, and Celine doesn't know and doesn't want to know, which seems like a sad life as one of the good characters from the last movie is gone, which is Eve, and Celine gives that message to Thomas, who never liked Celine anyways, and the characters are not as interesting as the last time, which is a real problem for this movie, and the new characters are not that great either. The Lycans have a new leader named Marius, who is not a good character in my opinion as a villain. He wants Celine dead for what reason? Well, we'll talk about it. Because he's a goddamn Lycan. That's all I'll have to say for now. As Celine pulls a bullet out of David, and Thomas wants Celine after being convinced by Samira, who, after the meeting with the Vampire Council, and Celine and David are found by two vampires, and they take Celine to council and meets the recruits to fight with the Lycans, and meets Varga, and Celine reluctantly accepts to train the recruits, as Samira and Varga are secret lovers as they want Celine dead, and the other leaders in order to step up as a vampire elder. And this movie is all over the place, and the plot makes no sense at this point. I can't even make sense of anything going on in this movie. After a training exercise, Varga shoots the recruits and makes them ash as he and Samira frame Celine for killing them as Celine and David make a run for it as Thomas gets them out as David witnesses his father Thomas's death as he and Celine end up escaping, and the whole framing Celine thing despite Varga and Samira was rather predictable. And so was the escape as we learn David can walk in the sun, in which I didn't know how or why. This makes no sense. Samira sends a vampire named Alexia to find Celine and David, and she meets with Marius as they're in a forbidden affair. Yes, they're in love, which doesn't matter because that happened before in the Rise of the Lycans. So how is that a forbidden affair? I can't make sense of this series, honestly. I just can't. She tells Marius about Celine's escape and how the other vampires are closing in on him, and their clan is that possible. And I'm sorry, but none of these matters because this script was written like like a first draft 13-year-old who can't write would write it as, which is the biggest fucking problem with the whole movie. Celine and David go to the sanctuary of the Nordic Vampire Coven, which is in Antarctica, and meets Lena and her father Vider, who reveals David's mother was Amelia, who was one of the vampire elders with with Victor, but doesn't believe it as he gives Donald a sword made of pure silver, which was Thomas's greatest weapon, and this whole backstory is needed, but it's a good reason. But is it a good reason to have this plot? Probably not. Celine feels shamed for not taking care of Eve, and my problem with that is, couldn't she start over and become a mother? But I'm here for the popcorn entertainment, not the things that don't make sense to me. But the movie forces you to hear the plot which I can't because I can't make sense of it. Like I said last two times. The Lycans eventually find the sanctuary as they begin to attack the vampires fight back with the help of Celine and David as David manages to slice one lichen in half with the sword. Marius fights Celine on ice, which felt very choreographed as he demands to know where Eve is, as Alexia impales Celine with the blood as she licks it and realizes she doesn't know where she is. As she sinks in the icy water as Lena recovers Celine and begins to revive her, and if she doesn't know why the fuck does Marius want to shoot Celine to death? It was giving me the biggest headache of this whole movie, and is loud. And the action sequences, and that's been a problem since the Matrix sequels, whereas you can not hear the dialogue, but you can hear the action louder, which I'll get to when Part 4 prepares to come out, the Matrix trilogy, I mean. Or now Part 4 coming out. Back in the Eastern Coven, Samira drinks Celine's blood to absorb the same power she does as she learns about Alexia and Marius' affair. And I'm an hour into it, and I'm ready to check out of this movie at this point. And as I'm an hour into it, and I got 30 more minutes to go. David tells Samira and the council he is Amelia's son, and knowing his claim would be challenged, he gives the council the vial of his mother's blood. And when Samira orders Varga to kill David, but instead Vargas orders Samira to be detained, which is very unrealistic. The vampires prepare for battle as Marius' army comes banging in as the Lycans expose the lights to the vampires. To the light, Lena comes in to join the fight along with her army, and Celine comes back more powerful than ever with a fur coat. And for some fucking reason, which is an odd choice, David takes on Samira and she's exposed to the light but doesn't die until David runs his sword through her head and kills her, which was awfully choreographed. And that part of the CGI, it was awful. Marius morphs into a gigantic wolf creature, and the effects on that wolf looked awful. Marius is wounded, and some of his blood hits Celine's mouth as she sees his memories, and he learns he found Michael and murdered him. And she rips his spine for good, which was a CGI looking battle that looked pretty damn bad. Celine and David interrupt the battle, showing Marius' severed head to the Lycans as they force them to retreat. Celine, David, and Lena are now the vampire elders, and this climax is a bunch of fucking nonsense. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 1.8 out of 10. The fights felt very choreographed, and the CGI looked awful. And this was a headache of a movie, as it was a bunch of nonsense. These movies are really bad, except Awakening, which I gave a 5 to that one. And I had a good time with that one. But like the other ones, this was painful to go through. And I can't make sense of this plot, as it makes no sense whatsoever. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with I, Frankenstein. And until next time, it's time to shoot some vampires, or Lycans.